Welcome to the Good Budget Way, where we share real-life stories about everyday people from all walks of life who spend, save, and give to what's truly important in life. I'm your host, Chien. I'm glad to hear how helpful this podcast has been and how much folks have been learning from it. So thank you so much for letting us know and subscribing to this podcast. You're listening to the third episode of 11 on Season 1 of the Good Budget Way. In the last episode with Carissa, we heard about how she and her roommate, Ariana, went through the process of looking for their first apartment, starting from being clear with each other at the beginning of what was important to them, compromising along the way, and all the whole time having key money talks with each other. So if you haven't heard that episode, definitely go back and check it out. You can hear Carissa's story and all of the joys that they experienced and struggles through the process of looking for their first apartment. The guests I have on today have been the most open about their differences and disagreements and how they've worked them out. In this episode, Kenny and Becky will tell us about how it went in their first few months of sharing finances and a budget together as a married couple. Let's get into it. Hey there, thanks for coming in today to be on our show.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Would you start us off by telling us a little bit about who you are?
My name is Becky, and I just got married to Kenny. We've been married about 9 months.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
My name is Kenny. I just got married to Becky 9 months ago.
I'm glad you got married to each other. So you've been married for 9 months now. How long have you been talking about finances with each other?
I'd say the months leading up to the wedding, we actually talked about it because we did some premarital counseling. A couple folks suggested that would be a good way to start conversations about our marriage. And so we actually had a few sessions with a counselor, and he guided us through some interesting topics.
In these premarital counseling sessions, I assume there were a lot of different kinds of topics that came up because marriage is just so complex and there's a lot of layers. But it sounds like money, finances, budgeting, it did come up. So what did you talk about in those sessions?
Yeah, so we had I think he dedicated one session to finances, and we filled out a worksheet about what we think about money and how we think we spend money and how we think the other person spends money.
Yeah, and we talked about a lot of sort of our points of view on finance and how we want to handle money. One big question was whether we wanted to start a joint account. And then also we talked about how we want a budget ultimately. So I think we had some differences on that. Becky cares a lot more about specific areas that we spend money in, whereas for me, I'm more practical about it. I'd like to kind of see, does our spending exceed our income? And if it's lower than that, then that's great.
You care about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
That's interesting that even before you were married, because you were able to go through this worksheet and ask some key questions, you already had a sense of what your differences were. That Becky maybe was more detail-oriented and looked at each different area of spending a little more closely. Kenny was looking more at big picture. Is income greater than spending? You also talked about one of the key questions was, were you going to open a joint account? Mm-hmm. What did you think about when that question came up?
That question was actually pretty easy for both of us. In both of our minds, I think we were both like, duh. I think that wasn't a point of tension.
Yeah, so we both felt like we should open a joint account or share our accounts. From my perspective, it was one of the big sort of commitments that a couple would make with each other, as a married couple. There's a lot that we want to be more transparent about as well as accountable. And so sharing a bank account, while agreeing on discretionary spending for each of us, sharing a bank account was just sort of a step towards that intimacy in a marriage that we both felt like was obvious. For me, I didn't even think that was a common issue between couples, and so it was eye-opening for me to even, realize that there are married couples out there that don't even share their bank accounts.
Yeah, there's a reason why it was on your worksheet, right? Because there are couples who choose not to share, or there are couples that do kind of half and half, some shared, some not. It sounds like you both were pretty clear about, yes, we're going to have a joint account. And it sounds like there was some meaning behind that. Maybe there were some practical issues, but the words that I heard you say were intimacy, transparency, accountability. So it sounds like for you, it really had to do with the relationship and what that choice on the finances that maybe could be seen as practical, it actually had to do with the heart of your relationship. So that's really beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah, I think ultimately you can get a very good sense of somebody based off of what that person spends their money in.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you just look at, if I'm spending, if my discretionary spending is all on sports paraphernalia and, Houston Rockets tickets, then, you can make an assumption that person cares a lot about his local sports team.
And would that be true of you?
Yes.
Yes.
I like that Becky's answering that question.
We even drove out to Sacramento just to watch the Rockets play the Kings because it's cheaper than playing the Warriors, especially this year.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you have some differences, one of them being Becky tends to look a little more closely at each area of spending, whereas Kenny tends to look at the big picture. You've been married for 9 months now, and it sounds like you've been sharing a joint account for a good part of that. How have you worked out some of your differences?
For me, I care a lot about the details, and a lot of the times the details are the things that are more variable. When we first got married and we sat down and made a budget, the thing that I noticed most that was very different than my own personal budget from before was that there are so many more bills.
What kind of bills did you notice?
Well, Kenny had bought a house before we got married, so we have a mortgage, we have the internet bill, we have electricity, we have a bunch of subscriptions to magazines. What else do we have?
Netflix, Spotify, utility, HOA, property tax.
Yeah, property tax. We paid that.
There's a lot.
We paid property tax, I think, the month or two after we got married, and that was shocking to me.
Why was it shocking to you, Becky?
It's such a large number, and it's just. I didn't own a house before that, so it didn't occur to me that it would be so large.
To see
so sudden, yeah.
To see such a big number come up and then hit your budget and your checking account, I assume.
Yes. So that was a surprise.
So in some ways it sounds like making the budget together, it helped surface maybe some of the differences that you had in your own experiences with finances before, with Becky being new to owning a home and Kenny already having experienced a lot of those expenses and how to think about all the bills. Sometimes it can be hard for folks to connect with each other since one person is actually more aware of one part of the budget and the other person's aware of the other part. But it sounds like the two of you making the budget together at least helped to begin to open up that conversation and have you both have a common understanding of what you were looking at.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you asked us now after 9 months, I would say Becky probably knows a lot more of the details of where all of our money goes to, not just with our credit cards and all of that are already tracked, but also even just the cash expenditures. So, I got a haircut, last week, and my barber only takes cash, and she keeps reminding me to log that in as a cash spend to my monthly haircut budget.
So Becky's the one who's reminding you to put that in the Goodbudget app?
Yeah, for tracking.
Yeah.
And he did it today, so I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
So it sounds like between the two of you, Becky's the one who tends to track each transaction more closely every time there's spending or income. And Kenny maybe sometimes tracks and sometimes needs to be reminded.
I like to look at the accounts. So at the account level, what do we have coming in? And, if our spending is X percent of our income overall, as well as any sort of investments that I like to kind of dabble in.
I was just going to talk about the discretionary, because I don't think we answered your question from before we started talking about making a budget. But because I'm the person that keeps track of everything, I know that there are certain things that are fixed. Most of our bills, a big portion of our spending are fixed. So I tend to focus on the items that are variable, which happen to be, well, for us, it was food and then also discretionary spending. And so we actually, because those are the two categories of spending that that were variable, we actually did try to do some things with food. For example, we tried to eat in the first couple months of our marriage.
How did that go?
We thought it would save a lot of money for us.
What kinds of food were you cooking when you're eating in?
Simple stuff, pastas, and
we made a lot of rice.
Yeah.
Rice and beans.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like super meager. I mean, we did get some stuff from Whole Foods every now and then, but it wasn't. It was more work. We would always have to think about what we made. We would always eat leftovers, things like that. But I think at the end, what we realized was that the groceries were not that much cheaper than eating out. I mean, it is cheaper, definitely, but ultimately, we were talking about a couple percentage points of our overall budget.
I think that the spending that we were actually focusing on was like 1 to 2% of our spending. So it didn't make that much of a difference whether.
Right. And we were arguing over 1% of, the overall sort of discretionary budget. And so it gave us more perspective rather than getting really heated in any disagreements.
I think that's actually really helpful. I think sometimes in any couple, people get focused on a particular area of the budget, trying to do experiments with it to see if you can move the needle up and down. And I think that's great, doing experiments, trying things out. And it sounds like you tried this for a couple months. But then after a couple months, you realized a few things. It was more work. It sounded like there was some sense of folks being tired about it. And then also that it actually became a source of contention in your relationship and it was causing arguments. Then when you stepped back, you realize like, oh, okay, this is like 1 or 2% of our entire budget. Is this really where we want to be focusing our energy? And I think I really appreciate the way that you chose not to give each other guilt trips about it, but step back and say, okay, well, actually, maybe let's look at and focus on some other area, since this actually isn't making a huge difference in our budget, but it's making a significant difference negatively, potentially, in our relationship.
Yeah. Well, and it built we started building habits too. So, I think now, I mean, I certainly don't eat out as much as I did when, I was single. So, yeah, I look in the fridge, I always look for leftovers or something that I can scrap together fairly easily. We also Becky noticed something interesting that we for our discretionary spending, that she actually we both spend the same amount generally, but she has more transactions than I do.
Yeah, I think in relationships, people always say, oh, there's the one person that's a spender and then there's one that's the saver. And I think when we first got married, I mean, Kenny already knew this, but I order a lot of things online. And that's because I'm the person that buys a bunch of things and then returns like 80% of them. Got to try everything on. So a lot of times, he'll just think, well, you shop a lot. But then when we actually looked up, like I actually did like we ran a report in Goodbudget actually, and we looked at all of our spending for the last 8-9 months, and the amount of money was actually pretty close. Our discretionary spending for the two of us for the last 8-9 months are the same, but the number of transactions were, I think I had 4 times as many transactions as Kenny. So it's not that Kenny doesn't spend, it's just that he tends to have bigger purchases less frequently.
I think that's really fun to notice that, because I think you could have this perspective from either of your seats that Becky could say, oh, Kenny, you're the spender in the relationship because you're the one who goes out and spends $100, $200 in one go. What are you doing? And then Kenny could be looking at Becky saying, why are you shopping online every day? What's going on? But you're actually looking at the numbers and getting a sense, oh, it actually adds up to the same amount, so we can have a conversation about this.
Yeah, I think we're learning a lot about each other and how we spend. And, there's no wrong way. I think it's just a good, there are different ways, and it's good to talk about them.
I think that's really helpful perspective to know, yeah, we're different. And neither one is wrong, but we are working together and understanding ourselves and understanding each other better. That's really beautiful. What if one of you is thinking, oh, I want to buy something kind of like a big ticket item? What happens in your house?
Well, we just got married, so we don't really... I mean, the main things that we've been purchasing, the big ticket items we've been purchasing are furniture. We wanted... What did we buy recently? Oh,
a desk.
A desk.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we just sort of talk about it and talk about what we want to see. An ottoman. You got that ottoman that took forever to deliver. We didn't live together before we got married, so Becky moving in was a transition period for her. In particular, just the physical environment that we're in, which is my townhome. So I already had things that were furnished, but Becky has strong opinions about where things should go and what we need. And I also kicked out a couple of roommates that I had, so we had some open rooms. So we needed to sort of make a decision together conceptually what these rooms are supposed to be, like an office or another bedroom or something like that. And that sort of set the tone of what we wanted. So, the second floor, we wanted to get an office, and so you probably need a desk. And so we started talking about what desks make sense, just given the space that we have and what we wanted to do with the room and the chairs in there and all of that. Becky has a really design-oriented eye, so she has a lot of opinions about what the desks should look like. So there were some conversations about that, and where we would want to get it, and whether we were willing to spend a little bit more since we own the place. We sort of felt like there was more at stake here, and so we were willing to kind of splurge a little bit on furniture that we were going to keep for a while.
So what's your favorite furniture purchase so far?
I want to say this really large mirror. It's really big.
Oh yeah, I don't want to say that because that mirror was so heavy and it was extremely hard to put on the wall. So
we're never moving it.
Yeah, no, it was literally like 200 pounds.
Oh my goodness!
The instructions said professional installation strongly recommended.
And did you go for the professional installation?
No, we did not.
That was a mistake.
I got a neighbor to help me out.
Why is this mirror special to you?
I think it was the first big purchase that we made that is more of a cosmetic style thing for our house. So
yeah.
a lot of other things are more for utility, like a desk. But this was a piece, a statement piece kind of item. So
Becky and I are very vain, and so we like to look at ourselves in the mirror. It's a full-length mirror too, so we get to see all of ourselves.
Does it magnify your size and make you look bigger than you are?
Oh, no, it's very real. It shows you you're real, what you really look like. It doesn't hide anything.
Yeah. I see. Well, it makes sense, though, that this mirror would be special to you because it's a statement piece, especially given that Becky has a design sense and that's a priority for her and for you as a couple. It's not kind of just oh, I just want this, I'm going to buy it. But it sounds like there's a sense that the way your choices in your home represent who you are and express your design and your creativity, that's actually important to you. And that kind of connects with something we talk about with the Good Budget way to spend on what's important. And there's a process of understanding what's truly important to me as a person or to us as a couple, and then making the choices that kind of support that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was the fact that we live there and this was ours. We're not renting, and we had no plans of moving anywhere in the short to midterm. So it was these are all things we were going to keep in the long run.
Which is why it was worth doing the 200-pound installation.
That's right.
All right. So you've been sharing finances, talking about it. Sounds like budgeting together, using the Goodbudget app, good job, for 9 months. What have you learned about each other in the process?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay, so I learned that Kenny is more of a bigger picture kind of guy. He looks at our monthly spending from a bird's eye view, and for him that's, he wants to know how much that came in and how much came out and like what the net is at the end of the month. Whereas I'm more focused on every little category and how we did on each category of spending.
And what do those categories mean to you, Becky?
I think that the categories, we created a budget and made up of these categories, and they're there for a reason. So I want to make sure that we stay within them, and also that if we have set aside money for something, that we should actually use that money for that purpose.
What's an example of something that's like that? You set aside money for it, and you want to make sure that you are actually using the money toward that purpose.
I think the envelope that we are currently in discussion about is our generosity envelope. In the beginning, when we made our budget, we decided that we did want to have room in there, to give towards something that we believe in. And we haven't actually made the decision for who or what we want to support yet. So it's kind of just been an envelope that's been growing and growing every month as we fill it. And so it's just sitting there. And I think it's getting to be a pretty large amount of money because it's been months and months. And so it's really easy to think, wow, like this is a lot of money. We could take a vacation with this, or we can get another large mirror or I don't know, like a cool furniture item. But I think, we set it and had it earmarked there for something else. So I want to make sure that we spend it on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it sounds like you've taken at least a couple pretty important first steps with that. One, you chose to make a generosity envelope to have that category in your budget, and that was a joint decision. And then not only did you make it, you have been setting aside money for it, and you've been filling it and keeping it there. And it sounds like not letting that money move into other things because you have a clear sense of purpose of, yes, this is important to us. We just haven't figured out how we're going to do it yet. So what is it that you think you're looking for? A cause that you believe in or something close to your heart that you might give to?
I don't know yet. We're still trying to figure that out. It's something that's important, so we don't take it lightly, and it's not something that we would just do out of obligation either. So we still have to figure that out.
I think that's really key, what you said about it's important to you, but you don't want to do it out of obligation. It sounds like for you, it's not just like, oh, we're going to do this because we're supposed to, or because that's what good people do, or folks tell us we should do this, but you're looking for a sense of connection, I think, of a cause you can believe in, something close to your heart that you feel like you can give and really give freely. That's kind of the heart of generosity, is giving freely rather than giving out of obligation, like you said. I think that's really great. Okay, so after 9 months of doing this together, how are you feeling about sharing finances and budgeting together?
I think we're kind of in a groove. We're not a groove, but we have, we clearly have different ways of looking at our budget. And I'm initially when we got started, I was like, we both have to add transactions. We both have to make sure we're checking it every day, and that we'd never go over. But that's. The reality is it never works out like that.
No, not for any couple.
Yeah, you can't both do the same things, and it gets tiring, or someone just gets mad, or it's not real. And I think we've kind of achieved a what's it called? Like a
equilibrium.
Yeah. An equilibrium. So we have a monthly meeting at the beginning of the month, and I think we're happy with that. And because I like to add transactions, I'm going to add my transactions, and that's fine. And if Kenny doesn't, I'm going to import them, and that's okay too.
Yeah, and I don't think the two viewpoints are always mutually exclusive either. Mm-hmm. I mean, I like to look at the accounts and what's coming in and out, and if there is something that I feel like is gone over, that's when Becky's more specific kind of tracking of each transaction and which category they all belong to actually is very useful. because then I can break it down and see it in more clearly, you know, what areas did we overspend, whether it's food or, you know, clothes or, you know, Kirby's or dog, you know, things like that.
Yeah, I remember there was one month where you thought, whoa, this is really high. I think it was the month of February. And it turned out, you know, we looked at the spending report, and it was because we went on vacation. So there was a lot more, like, you know, all the airline tickets and all that stuff happened in that month. And so it was abnormally high.
I think that's great because you have one person who's focusing on the big picture, you kind of know where the flags are, what issues might be worth looking into. And in that case, it was that February spending was high. And then because you have a tracker in Becky, then when you ask that question, you can actually find out why was it high and get down to, oh, it was because vacation. And then both of you can talk about like, oh yeah, that was the decision we made together. We feel good about it. Cool. Or you could look at it and say, well, that wasn't the best decision. We won't do that again. And you can still be on a team together about that. That's really great. Well, thank you so much for coming in to be on our show today and sharing your story with us.
Yeah, this is really fun.
We hope to be back.
I love how open and real Kenny and Becky were with each other and with us too about the real differences they have when it comes to money. It sounds like they're really working it out with each other and deepening their relationship, building intimacy by sharing money in the midst of their differences. And I love that they've really embraced saying goodbye to guilt by allowing each other to spend in their different ways. A lot of small purchases often, or a few big ones once in a while. In the Good Budget way, we often talk about other people helping us see our blind spots. What's cool about Kenny and Becky is they take it one step further by seeing their different perspectives on big picture versus detailed tracking as complementary strengths. That is amazing. For me, this inspires me in my own marriage. Now, we've been married 8 years, not 8 months, so we have worked to agree on a lot of things, but there are still areas where we have different opinions. And for me, this inspires me to go back and restart those conversations and deepen our relationship too. Next time, we'll hear from Matt and Janelle, who will be here to share with us their story of figuring out how they can afford to retire near the people they love, and in the process, choosing to move onto a boat. Thanks for listening to Becky and Kenny's story. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do subscribe for more and rate it to help other folks find it too. And let us know what you thought of their story on our website at goodbudget.com/podcast. If they inspired you to budget with a Y, head on over to goodbudget.com to get started on your budget with our software that's easy to sync and share with a partner. Or look for the Good Budget app on Google Play or the App Store. Happy budgeting!